They called her a burden, a silent Apache girl sold at auction for $1, her eyes too tired to plead, her secrets buried deeper than the desert roots. When the lonely cowboy took her home, nobody guessed what she carried beneath her silence, or how that secret would change everything he believed about love and survival. The air was brittle with dust the morning Elias Carter stepped into the faded circle that passed for an auction yard. Spring hadn't touched this corner of Arizona yet, and every face in the crowd bore the mark of winter. Cracked lips, hungry eyes, hope worn down to bone. Elias was a man most folks overlooked. Too quiet, too slow. The kind of cowboy who fixed his own fence and kept his sorrows tucked away with the broken bits of tack in the barn. He'd come to town for feed and lamp oil, nothing more. But the crowd's noise drew him. Men shouted, boots thumped on dry boards, and a sheriff in a sweat-stained shirt banged a stick on the wagon bed. At the center stood a girl, barefoot, her long black hair knotted and tangled, her dress little more than torn muslin hanging from thin shoulders. Her wrists were bound with rough rope. She didn't flinch at the laughter or the taunts, didn't lift her head when they called her runaway, half wild, more trouble than she's worth. Just stood, unmoving, her arms folded over her belly like she was guarding something only she could see. Last one for the day, the sheriff barked, impatient. Apache girl, no name, found alone near the tracks, claims she'll work but hasn't spoken a word. Who'll take her off our hands? A few men snorted. Not for any price, someone jeered. Not for all the gold in Tombstone. A boy spat into the dirt. A woman shook her head, pity and fear mixed in her eyes. The bidding started at $5, dropped fast. 4, 3, then 1. Silence stretched until it felt like the world itself was waiting. Elias didn't know why he raised his hand. Maybe it was the way she never looked away from the horizon, or the ghost of defiance in her posture. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe something else. $1, sold, the sheriff called. Eager to be rid of her, no one cheered. No one stopped Elias as he stepped forward and untied the rope from her wrists. She didn't thank him, didn't look back, just followed as he led her through the thinning crowd, the sun-burning shadows across the hard-packed ground. Back at his horse, Elias hesitated. He glanced at the girl, at the faded scar on her cheek, the way she kept her arms tight across her middle. He wondered what she was hiding, or what the world had taken from her to leave her so silent. He didn't know it yet, but that dollar would buy him not just a stranger, but a secret that would force him to question everything he thought he knew about mercy, trust, and the weight of a second chance. The ride home was quiet. Elias guided his old gelding along the narrow trail out of town, the Apache girl walking beside him, head bowed, bare feet kicking up tiny puffs of dust with each step. He offered her his canteen, but she shook her head, lips pressed tight. She didn't limp, though her feet must have been raw from the sun-baked ground. Elias kept glancing at her, unsure what to say or do. He wasn't used to company. The ranch, just a few miles outside Wilcox, was all he had left after bad luck and worse winters. He wondered if she knew she was walking toward a life of hard work and solitude, a house with empty rooms and ghosts that never stopped whispering at night. At first, he tried to make conversation, just enough to be decent. "You got a name?" Silence. "Don't got to talk if you don't want," he added, after a beat. She only gripped her arms tighter, gaze fixed on the low line of the hills ahead. It was like speaking into a canyon. His words dropped and vanished. No echo, no answer. Elias's boots scuffed rocks as he walked beside her, leading the horse more slowly than usual. He wondered if she was angry or just afraid, if she would run the first chance she got. The ranch appeared, a squat outline of timber and adobe, barn leaning a bit to one side, chicken coop half collapsed from last year's storm. Weeds tangled at the fence posts, but the gate still hung straight. Elias paused, waiting for her to catch up. "Ain't much," he said, voice flat. "But it's honest work." She blinked, no sign of understanding or judgment, just a long, searching look at the fields, the empty yard, the single pinto horse grazing alone in the far paddock. He led her inside. The air was cool, filtered through thin curtains. "You hungry?" he asked, and for the first time, she hesitated, nodding almost imperceptibly. Elias's heart skipped, a reaction at least. He found half a loaf of cornbread, a jar of beans, poured water into a tin cup and set it before her at the scarred kitchen table. She ate slowly, picking small pieces, never looking at him. He noticed her hands were steady, her movements careful, but not clumsy. Not a wild thing, he thought, just someone used to watching, waiting, never trusting the world to be kind. Elias worked outside that afternoon, mending a fence where the rails had slipped, always aware of the figure moving quietly inside the house. He caught glimpses through the window, the girl sweeping dust from the floor, folding the blanket on the cot, setting dishes in neat stacks. She made no noise, left no trace of herself but order. When he came in at dusk, tired and sore, she was by the fire, staring at the flames, face lit with a soft orange glow. He tried again, voice low, careful. "I can pay you a little, once the calves are weaned. You can go after if that's what you want. I won't stop you." She turned, eyes dark and solemn, studying him like he was a puzzle she didn't trust. For a moment, he wondered if she would finally speak. Instead, she shook her head, quick and sharp, as if refusing something she couldn't explain. The nights came cold. He gave her his old coat, threadbare but warm, and she took it with a nod, wrapping it tightly around her body. Elias lay awake, listening to the wind rattle the windows, wondering who she was, what story had brought her to that auction, what pain she carried in silence. Once, lately, he heard soft footsteps on the porch, then saw her standing there, looking up at the moon, lips moving as if whispering to someone far away. He stayed quiet, not wanting to break whatever spell she'd cast over herself. Over the next days, she settled into a routine, up before dawn, carrying water from the well, scattering feed for the chickens, never needing to be told twice. She learned quickly, hands nimble, eyes always alert. But Elias noticed things. How she winced when bending to lift a bucket, how she paused after carrying heavy loads, how her fingers sometimes pressed unconsciously to her stomach when she thought he wasn't looking. He wondered, but didn't ask. Maybe she was sick. Maybe she'd been hurt. But one morning, as he saddled the pinto for a ride to the far pasture, he saw her doubled over in the yard, face pale, breath shallow. He rushed over, but she straightened, wiped her mouth, and forced a weak smile, as if daring him to question her strength. "You all right?" he asked, concern edging his voice. She nodded, but the answer was too quick, too rehearsed. That night, as he sat by the fire whittling a broken stirrup, the girl sat across from him, clutching her knees to her chest, eyes darting between the flames and the shadows on the walls. Something unspoken stretched between them. Fear, curiosity, a flicker of trust not yet born. Elias realized, and with a pang, that he wanted to protect her, not because she belonged to him, but because no one else ever had. Yet, the secret she kept was growing, quietly, beneath their noses. And soon, the truth would force both of them to face everything they'd been running from. The next morning, Mara was up before the first blush of sunlight reached the ragged fence line. She moved through the kitchen as quietly as a shadow, trying to repay Will's meager kindness in small ways, sweeping, folding his coat, laying out the mugs. The routine was unfamiliar, but not hard. What was hard was the silence, thick as mud, that filled every corner of the house. Will found her at the stove, poking at embers, eyes ringed with the exhaustion of another night spent half awake. He paused in the doorway, one hand braced on the frame, studying her. There was something about the way she held herself, rigid as if expecting a blow or a sharp word at any moment. He thought of his own first months here after his brother died, when he'd flinched at every noise, bracing for ghosts that never came. He cleared his throat, making her jump. "You don't have to do that," he said gently. Mara stared at the broom in her hands, then back at him, uncertain. "I want to," she said, barely above a whisper. It was the first thing she'd said to him since they'd left town. The sound of her voice caught him off guard, a bit deeper, rough around the edges, but steady. He nodded, pushing past the awkwardness. "Breakfast, then?" He cracked eggs into a pan, fried a slab of salt pork, and divided the food between their plates. They ate in silence. the kind that felt almost peaceful. Mara ate slowly, savoring every bite, never leaving a crumb behind. When they finished and Will stood stretching. "I'll show you the barn," he said. "We got to check the calves." Mara nodded, following him out. The air was crisp, the ground still damp from last night's rain. She shivered, pulling the coat tighter around her shoulders. The barn was old but solid, built by Will's grandfather. Dust motes swirled in the morning light, catching in the beams overhead. Will explained the chores, how to fill the troughs, what feed went where, which calves needed watching. Mara listened intently, asking no questions but catching every detail. Her hands were clumsy at first, but she worked with a quiet determination that surprised him. Afterward, Will led her out to the pasture, pointing out the boundaries of his land. "See those rocks?" he said, gesturing toward a distant ridge. "That's the far line. Everything between here and there's got to be tended, one way or another." Mara scanned the open land, rolling grass, wind-bent trees, a sky so wide it made her dizzy. There was no sign of another soul. For the first time in weeks, she felt something other than fear, a small, fragile sense of possibility. As they walked back, Will tried to make conversation. "I know you didn't choose this," he said quietly, "but you're safe here. I don't want anything from you except help with the ranch. That's all." Mara glanced at him, searching his face for hidden meaning. She saw only honesty, plain and simple. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They settled into a rhythm over the next few days. Mara worked hard, sometimes pushing herself until her arms ached and her legs threatened to buckle. Will tried to ease her burden, but she was stubborn, insisting on finishing chores, never asking for rest. When he asked if she needed a break, she'd shake her head and keep moving. But some days were harder than others. Sometimes, when she thought Will wasn't watching, Mara's shoulders would slump under the weight of old wounds. She moved slower, rubbing at her side or pausing to catch her breath. Will noticed, but said nothing, worried that too much kindness would push her further away. One evening after supper, Will found her sitting on the porch, staring out at the sunset. He sat beside her, silence stretching between them. At length, Mara spoke, her voice trembling. "They called me a curse," she said, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Said I brought hunger, bad luck. They said if they sent me away, things would get better." Will felt anger rising in his chest, not at her, but at the cruelty of people who'd never known real hunger or loss. He didn't try to offer empty comfort, only sat closer, letting her know she wasn't alone. "You're not a curse," he said quietly. "You're just a person, like anyone else. Folks see what they want to see." Tears pricked Mara's eyes, but she blinked them away. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't what they'd said she was. Days grew longer, and work piled up. Mara began to find a sense of pride in her tasks, stacking wood, mending fences, chasing stubborn calves. She learned the rhythm of the land, the way the wind changed before a storm, the cries of hawks hunting overhead. Will trusted her with more, and she began to trust herself. But one night, as a wild wind battered the house and thunder rolled over the hills, Mara woke gasping, heart pounding. Shadows on the wall looked like the faces from her old life, jeering, pointing. She pressed her hands over her ears, wishing she could silence the voices for good. Will heard her sobs and came to the door, unsure if he should enter. "Mara?" he called softly. She didn't answer, but after a moment, she opened the door herself, face pale but resolute. "Will you sit here, just until the storm passes?" she asked, voice shaking. He nodded, taking a seat on the floor back to the wall. Neither of them spoke as the wind screamed and the rain battered the roof. But for the first time since she'd arrived, Mara let herself hope that maybe this place could become home, not because someone had chosen it for her, but because she was choosing finally to stay. Yet as the thunder faded and the silence returned, a new fear settled over her. What if her past came looking for her? What if the world beyond this fragile piece refused to let her go? Because in the distance, beneath the sound of the wind, another presence was moving, one that would soon force Mara and Will to confront everything they'd tried to leave behind. In the days that followed, Mara grew stronger in ways she hadn't known were possible. The chores that once left her breathless became routine. Her arms, once soft and unsure, gained muscle. Her steps found a steadiness that surprised even Will. He watched from a distance, quietly respecting her space, but noticing the subtle changes. A surer grip on the water buckets, a more confident command when wrangling the calves. She was finding her place, little by little. Still, the fear never left her completely. Some nights, she'd jolt awake, heart hammering, eyes wide as if expecting someone to appear in the doorway. Will never pressed her for details, but one evening as they were fixing a broken fence, he gently asked, "What happened, back there, before you came here?" Mara hesitated. The hammer paused mid-swing, knuckles white. She swallowed, looking out over the dusk-stained pasture. "In my tribe, everything is about balance, who eats, who works, who brings fortune or trouble. When food grew scarce and the storms ruined our crops, people looked for something, someone to blame. I was easy, too big, too slow, too different. They said I ate more than my share, that my shadow brought hunger. I heard it so often I started to believe it." She lowered her head, voice barely audible. "And then they sold me, to pay for a debt, or maybe just to be rid of me." The words hung in the air, raw and heavy. Will didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked at the battered fence, then at Mara. "Well, out here, everyone eats what they earn. You've done more than your share. That's the only measure I care about." Mara met his eyes for a moment, and something in her relaxed, if only slightly. But just as a fragile sense of belonging began to root itself, strange signs appeared around the ranch. One morning, Will found the chicken coop's door swinging open, the latch broken, and 3 hens missing. "Raccoons, maybe," he muttered, though the prints in the mud were boot-shaped, not paw-shaped. A day later, Mara spotted a thin plume of smoke rising from the far edge of the property, too far for Will's fires, too close for comfort. That night, the dogs barked wildly at nothing, pacing the yard until dawn. Mara felt the old fear return, sharp and electric. She kept her distance from the windows, remembering all too well the way people could disappear in the night, sold or shamed, their names whispered only as warnings. Will tried to reassure her, "Nobody comes out here unless they're lost or looking for trouble. I can handle either." But the worry stayed with her, haunting her dreams and shadowing her days. She started to check the doors twice at night, kept a knife under her pillow, listened for every stray noise in the dark. Will saw the changes, her jumpiness, the way she glanced over her shoulder even when the yard was empty. "If someone's out there, I'll deal with it," he said one evening, voice gentle but firm. "You don't have to carry that weight alone." It was nearly a week after the first signs when the stranger finally appeared. Mara was in the barn, pitching hay, when the dogs erupted into a frenzy. She peered out to see a lone rider at the edge of the property, tall, thin, his hat pulled low and a rifle strapped to his saddle. Will walked out to meet him, keeping his own hand near his hip. The man's voice drifted across the yard, cold and unfamiliar. "Looking for someone," he said. "Saw a girl pass this way, big one, not easy to miss. Her people want her back." Will bristled. "No one here but me and my help. You got business? State it. If not, move on." The rider's eyes narrowed. "If she's here, you'll wish you'd handed her over when you had the chance." Mara, watching from the shadows, felt the old panic surge. Was it someone from her tribe? A trader, hoping to drag her back for a bounty? She pressed herself against the stall wall. Breath caught in her throat. Will stood his ground, calm but unyielding. "You're trespassing. Last warning." The rider spat in the dirt, then turned his horse, disappearing into the dusk. The dogs barked after him until his silhouette vanished over the ridge. That night, the tension in the house was palpable. Will checked the locks twice, then settled by the door with his rifle. Mara lay awake, every muscle tense, wondering if she'd brought danger to the only home she'd ever known. When Will finally spoke, his voice was soft but certain. "They won't take you from here, Mara. Not while I'm standing." But even as she tried to believe him, the old doubt gnawed at her. She'd seen men change their minds when the price was right, had seen kindness traded for silver, safety for survival. She wanted to trust Will, But trust was something she'd learned to ration like hope, used sparingly and never all at once. In the dead of night, a noise outside shattered the uneasy peace, a crash near the barn, then hurried footsteps in the mud. Will was up in a flash, rifle in hand, eyes hard and alert. Mara held her breath, every old fear roaring to life as the shadowy threat closed in. And as the door rattled in its frame, Mara knew, whatever she was running from, it had finally found her. And this time, there was nowhere left to hide. Will moved like a man trained by years of uncertainty. He signaled to Mara with a quick motion, "Stay hidden, keep quiet." She ducked low, clutching her knife, heart hammering so violently it drowned out all thought. Outside, the sound of boots in mud grew louder, then paused at the barn door. The dogs howled, scratching at the floorboards to be let out. Will crept to the window, careful not to silhouette himself against the lamplight. He saw two figures by the barn. One carried a lantern, the other a crowbar. They spoke in low voices, arguing. "He's got to have her inside," one hissed. "The boss wants her back before sunup." The other grunted, swinging the crowbar at the barn latch. The sound split the night, a metallic shriek, sharp and final. Mara's breath hitched. Every part of her screamed to run, to vanish into the fields, but she remembered Will's promise. She forced herself to stay down, gripping the knife so hard her knuckles turned white. Will eased the door open, moving with a stillness that made him nearly invisible. He slipped out, rifle cradled in his arms, eyes cold with purpose. A flash of movement. He was behind the men in seconds, voice low and deadly. "Step away from my barn." The men jerked around, startled. The lantern swung, casting wild shadows across the yard. One man raised the crowbar. "Move aside, rancher. This ain't your fight." Will's finger stayed poised on the trigger. "It is now. Last chance. Drop it and leave, or this gets ugly." For a moment, no one breathed. Then the larger man lunged, crowbar raised. Will fired a warning shot into the dirt, so close the man stumbled backward, falling. The other dropped the lantern, glass shattering, oil flaming out in a small wild blaze. Panic erupted. The flames licked at the dry grass, growing fast. "You idiot!" one shouted, scrambling to stamp it out. Will advanced, rifle steady. "Go! Next one hits flesh." The intruders, seeing the cold certainty in his face, scrambled to their horses and bolted into the dark, leaving the fire to creep hungrily toward the barn. Mara burst from hiding, rushing to Will's side. He shouted, "Get water now!" Together they fought the flames, hauling buckets from the pump, beating at the fire with old coats and blankets. The smoke stung their eyes, turning everything into a blur of light and panic. Mara's arms shook, but she didn't let go. She ran back and forth, pouring water, coughing, refusing to quit. Will, grim and determined, worked by her side, shouting orders, his face blackened with soot. Finally, as dawn broke pale and uncertain over the horizon, the last ember hissed and died. The barn stood charred but standing. Mara collapsed onto the cold ground, chest heaving, hair plastered to her face. Will knelt beside her, hand shaking as he wiped sweat from his brow. "You all right?" he rasped. She nodded, too exhausted to speak, tears streaking clean lines through the soot. For the first time, Will let himself look vulnerable. His eyes glimmered with relief and pride. "You did good. Saved the whole place." Mara choked out a laugh that was half a sob. "I was sure we'd lose it all." She glanced at the barn, then at Will, who was still breathing hard but alive. "I thought I'd bring nothing but trouble here." Will shook his head. "You brought fight. Mara, you stayed. That means something." There was a new closeness in the space between them, forged by fire and fear. In that moment, Mara felt the truth of it. This ranch was not just Will's anymore. It was hers, too, earned with blistered hands and unwavering grit. But the dawn brought more than relief. As the light grew stronger, Will went to check the damage near the fence line. He called Mara over, voice tense. In the mud, clear as day, were tracks, fresh deep, circling the yard, pausing by the chicken coop and then heading north toward the hills. Whoever had come for her wasn't finished. They had failed tonight, but the message was clear. They would be back, and likely with more men. Mara stared at the prints, dread curling in her stomach. "They'll come again." Will nodded, his jaw set. "And we'll be ready." He handed her a battered old revolver, its handle worn smooth. "You ever shoot?" She shook her head. "You'll learn. If they come for you, you fight. Not just for yourself, but for what's yours now." Something changed in her then, a flicker of defiance, a flame that refused to die. For years, she had been told to shrink, to hide, to make herself smaller for others' comfort. Now, for the first time, she saw another way. With Will by her side, she could stand her ground. They spent the day reinforcing the barn, patching the fence, laying traps along the property's edge. Will taught her how to aim, how to steady her hands, how to breathe through the fear. Mara listened, practiced, and learned quickly. The rhythm of survival was no longer foreign. It was muscle, memory, determination. But as twilight crept in, painting the sky with bruised colors, Mara felt the old fear warring with new resolve. She stared at the horizon, where the strangers had disappeared, and wondered how many nights they had left before another storm broke over their fragile peace. That night, as she lay in bed, revolver close, a new thought took root, a stubborn, hopeful seed. If they returned, she would not run. This time, she would stand and fight for the life she had begun to claim. But outside, beyond the circle of lamplight, the darkness stirred again. And as the wind shifted, carrying distant hoofbeats on the night air, Mara knew the fight for her future was only just beginning. Days passed, each one edged with tension. The attack had left its mark, not just the blackened grass near the barn or the hurried repairs to the fence, but the way both Mara and Will moved through their days, always listening, always watching. Will was never far from his rifle now. Mara kept the old revolver tucked in the waistband of her skirt, her hands still awkward on the grip, but steadier with each passing hour. Rumors spread through the valley. At the general store in town, people whispered about the fire, the strangers, the rancher who'd taken in a girl the tribe itself had sold off. Some said Will had gone soft. Others wondered if trouble was all she'd ever bring. The air was thick with suspicion and curiosity. One morning, as Mara hauled a bucket of water from the well, she heard a wagon rattle up the main road. Dust curled in the sunlight, and three men stepped down, neighbors from nearby spreads, hard-faced, hands resting on the hilts of their pistols. Will met them at the gate, his posture straight, gaze unwavering. "Morning," called the eldest, a man with a deep scar across his cheek. "We heard there was trouble out here. Some of us are concerned." Will didn't flinch. "We handled it." The scarred man's eyes flicked to Mara, who froze as gripping the bucket. "You sure that's all it is? Folks say you took in a girl the Apache sent packing. Some say she's bad luck." A muscle jumped in Will's jaw. "She works harder than most men I know. This is my ranch. She stays." The other men shifted, uneasy. "You bring danger to your door, Will. These things spread. Maybe it's best to send her along." Mara set her jaw. She wanted to disappear, to slip into the barn and hide until they left. But Will's voice stopped her. "She's not going anywhere. You want to help. Help fix the fence line. Otherwise, let us be." There was a long, uncomfortable silence. Finally, the men grumbled, turned, and drove away. Will stood in the dust, shoulders rigid. When he finally turned to Mara, his expression softened. "They don't get to decide what happens here. You understand?" She nodded, but the worry was slow to leave her eyes. That afternoon, while cleaning tack in the barn, Mara found a scrap of paper wedged under the door, a rough drawing, a crude circle and cross, a warning symbol she'd seen once before, years ago, outside her tribe's camp when someone was cast out. Her blood ran cold. Will studied the note, his brow darkening. "It's a threat. From your people." Mara shook her head, voice trembling. "Not just them. Anyone who thinks I don't belong." The past she'd tried to leave behind kept clawing at her. She remembered the day the tribe elders gathered, her own mother refusing to meet her eye, the words spoken in front of the whole community. "She eats more than the hunters. She slows the group. No man wants her. She's a burden." They'd marked her as too wild, too much, not fit for marriage, not fit for the tribe's future. She'd wandered for weeks after that, living off what she could steal or beg, dodging men who saw only easy prey. She had scars, some visible, some deeper. It was the cowboy with the tired eyes who finally took her in, not out of pity, but out of stubborn decency. But she knew deep down that her past would not let her go so easily. That night, as the wind rose again and the old barn creaked, Will sat by the kitchen table, cleaning his rifle. Mara watched from the doorway, wrestling with fear. "Why do you keep me here?" she blurted, voice small. Will set down the rifle, looking at her over steepled hands. "Because I see who you are, not what people call you. You fight. You don't give up. You belong here as much as I do." Tears pricked at Mara's eyes. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that a place could be hers, that she could be wanted for something other than the work she did or the trouble she brought. But before she could answer, a sharp knock rattled the door. Both froze. Will stood, gun in hand, and opened it a crack. On the porch stood an Apache elder, wrapped in a faded blanket, eyes sharp as a hawk's. Behind him, 3 mounted riders waited, faces unreadable. "We come for the girl," the elder said, his English slow, deliberate. "She broke our laws. You shelter her, you make her your problem. But you should know, others will come, not just us." Will didn't back down. "She stays." The elder's gaze shifted to Mara, who stood trembling but unbroken. "Choose, girl. Run again or stand. Your fight isn't over." He turned and left, riders melting into the dark, leaving only the echo of a threat. As the door closed, Will locked it, then turned to Mara. "Next time, we face them together." But outside, shadows gathered along the tree line. The true test was coming. And this time, Mara knew running wasn't an option. The next morning, a rifle shot cracks the dawn silence. Someone has crossed the fence line, and the fight for the ranch and for Mara's right to belong has truly begun. The gunshot jolted Mara awake, the echo lingering in the frosty morning air. For a split second, she lay frozen on her cot, heart pounding in her chest. Then Will's voice cut through the silence, sharp, urgent. "Stay inside, lock the door." She scrambled to the window and saw Will, rifle in hand, moving swiftly along the fence line. Beyond him, 2 riders on horseback circled at a distance, their figures blurry in the dawn mist. A third man, on foot, stood just beyond the pasture gate, a rifle leveled at Will's chest. For a heartbeat, Mara's old fears rose up, memories of being chased, driven out, hunted down by those who saw her as less. But something new bloomed beneath the fear, fury, raw and protective. She rushed to the cupboard and grabbed the revolver, checking the chamber with trembling hands. She'd never fired at a person before. She told herself it didn't matter now. Outside, Will's voice rang out. "You've got no business here." "Get off my land!" The man by the gate spat in the dirt. "We come for the girl, rancher. Send her out, or things get ugly." Mara's breath caught. She ducked down, crawling toward the back door, careful to keep low. The barn sat between her and the strangers, a narrow gap, but maybe enough. Will shifted his stance, keeping the intruders in his sights. "She's not going anywhere. You want trouble, you'll find it." From inside the cabin, Mara could see the tension tightening Will's shoulders, the danger painted clear as day. She crept out the back, boots crunching in the grass, and slipped along the side of the barn. Her heart pounded as she peeked around the corner. The 2 riders flanked the man with the rifle, their horses stamping and restless. She looked for a weakness, a distraction, anything. And then she saw it, a coil of barbed wire half unwound beside the fence. Quickly, she grabbed a chunk of old scrap iron, threw it hard toward the horses. The clang startled the animals. They whinnied, rearing up, and one rider lost control, scrambling to keep from being thrown. The man with the rifle spun, distracted for a precious second. Will moved fast. In one fluid motion, he raised his own rifle and fired, not at the men, but into the dirt at their feet. "Last warning," he shouted, voice thunderous. The intruders hesitated. Then the man by the gate turned, face twisted with anger. "This isn't over. You've chosen the wrong side. Will kept the barrel trained on them. That's my decision. The men retreated, grumbling threats, but not before one turned in his saddle and spat, "We'll be back, and you'll wish you'd never laid eyes on her." As soon as they disappeared over the ridge, Will exhaled hard. Mara emerged from her hiding place, gun still clutched in her fist. Will's eyes widened as he saw her. "I told you to stay inside." She shook her head, voice tight. "I'm done hiding." Will studied her for a moment, then nodded with a reluctant respect. "You saved my skin back there. Those horses would have trampled me if you hadn't spooked them." For the rest of the morning, they worked side by side, repairing the section of fence the men had damaged, checking the livestock, setting fresh traps along the tree line. Will taught Mara how to reload the revolver, how to find cover and where to keep her eyes in a fight. Around midday, as Mara carried feed to the horses, she paused, sensing someone watching her. She turned, only to see one of the ranch hands, Jesse, lingering by the barn door. He looked uneasy. "People in town. They're saying more men are coming, not just from your tribe, but some of the ranchers too. Word is, they want you gone." Mara stiffened. "You believe that too?" Jesse shook his head. "No, miss. I seen the way you work, the way you fight for this place. Just be careful. Not everyone will stand with you like Will does." His words echoed in her mind all afternoon. The lines were being drawn, not just between her and her past, but all through the valley. Some would always see her as an outcast, an enemy. Others might see her as family if she fought hard enough to prove she belonged. That night, Will gathered the ranch hands in the kitchen, the air thick with tension. "They're coming back. Might be tonight, might be tomorrow. We stand together, or we lose everything." Mara looked around the room, faces marked by fear, but also a grim determination. For the first time, one of the older hands, Tom, turned to her and said, "You with us, girl?" She met his gaze, chin high. "All the way." As darkness fell, everyone took their posts, rifles by the doors, lanterns lit low, windows shuttered tight. Will checked the locks one last time, then turned to Mara. "I won't let them take you. Not now, not ever." She swallowed hard, but her voice was steady. "I'm not running, I'll fight beside you." Outside, the wind howled over the ridge. In the distance, the faint glow of torches began to appear along the main road, shadows moving, voices rising. The final siege was beginning. As the first rocks hit the windows and boots thunder on the porch, Mara and Will braced themselves, knowing that by sunrise, everything could be lost, or finally, truly, theirs. The night was a living, breathing thing, full of shadows, rage, and the sharp taste of fear. Mara crouched behind the kitchen table, revolver tight in her grip, every muscle coiled and ready. The walls shook as fists and boots hammered the doors. Shouts cut through the darkness, demanding Will surrender the girl. "Send her out and nobody gets hurt," came a familiar voice, rough and mocking. Will fired a warning shot through the top pane of the window. Glass exploded, scattering across the floor. "You want this ranch? You'll have to take it," he roared. Outside, the attackers regrouped, muttering threats. Lanterns bobbed in the night, casting wild shapes across the snow-dusted yard. Mara's heart pounded, but she forced herself to breathe steady. She'd spent a lifetime being blamed for storms she never caused. Tonight, for the first time, she chose to face the storm on her own terms. The first man through the door was Jesse. He hesitated, gun drawn. Mara's finger hovered over the trigger, but his eyes pleaded. "It's me!" In a flash, he shoved the door closed behind him and slid the bolt. "They're riled up," he gasped, "but not all of us are with them. I won't let them hurt you." In the chaos, the old ranch hand Tom covered a side window with his rifle. "They're coming round back," he shouted. Will sprinted to reinforce the rear door, yelling, "Mara, get to the cellar now," but Mara shook her head. "No more hiding. If they want me, let them see I'm not afraid." Suddenly, the back window shattered. A man climbed through, boots landing heavy on the floor. For a split second, the kitchen was a blur of motion. Mara turned, aimed, and squeezed the trigger. The gun cracked, and the intruder dropped with a cry, shot in the leg. Jesse pulled him aside, pressing a towel to the wound. The siege pressed on. From every window and door, voices spat curses, accusing Mara of bringing shame, of tempting ruin, of never belonging. She felt the old shame flare up, but she smothered it with every ounce of grit she'd learned. She stood tall in the kitchen's flickering lamplight, revolver in hand, and called out, "I am not leaving. This is my home now." A stunned silence followed. Even the men outside hesitated, thrown by her defiance. Then a crash at the back, the barricade buckled. Tom and Will braced themselves, holding off the intruders. Jesse reloaded, firing into the night to keep the rest at bay. But it was Mara who changed everything. She stepped into the doorway, lantern held high, and faced the mob head-on. "You want me?" she shouted. "Then look at me, not as an enemy, not as a problem, as a woman, as a human being. All my life I've been blamed, mocked, cast aside. But I won't let your hate decide who I am or where I belong." Her voice rang clear, slicing through the dark. Some of the men faltered. Others lowered their weapons, suddenly unsure. Will stood behind her, hand on her shoulder, his strength steadying her. "You heard her," he said. "This ranch is built on hard work and decency. If you're here for violence, you're no better than the ones who cast her out." The tension was a living thing, electric, ready to snap. Then, from the back of the crowd, a familiar voice rose. A woman from Mara's old tribe, her cousin Leah. "She's braver than any of you," Leah called out, stepping into the circle of light. "You shame yourselves, hunting one of your own just because she's different. What has hate ever brought but loss?" Leah's words rippled through the crowd, shaming some, igniting others. Suddenly, one of the attackers lunged forward, swinging a club. Will tackled him, wrestling the weapon away. Jesse fired a warning shot into the air, forcing everyone to freeze. "Enough," Tom barked. "If you want this to end in blood, keep pushing. If not, walk away now." A long, tense silence followed. Some of the ranchers dropped their weapons and slunk into the dark. Others stayed, anger undimmed, but unwilling to press further with guns trained on them. Mara, chest heaving, felt a strange calm settle over her. The worst had come, and she had not broken. But just as hope flickered, a single shot rang out from the shadows, aimed not at Mara, but at Will. He fell, blood blooming at his shoulder. Screams erupted. The crowd scattered, some fleeing, others rushing forward. Mara dropped to her knees beside Will, pressing her hands to the wound. "Stay with me, please," she whispered, voice raw with fear and love. As the lantern light wavered and the night filled with chaos, Mara realized this was not the end. The fight for her home, her place, her family had only just begun. As dawn crept over the battered ranch, Mara fought to keep Will alive. Even as new threats lurked in the shadows outside, was this the moment her courage would finally break, or would she rise stronger than ever before? Blood soaked through Will's shirt, dark and alarming. Mara pressed hard, her own hands trembling. Tom. Bandages. Jesse. The whiskey. Now. Her voice cut through the chaos. The men moved fast, driven by fear and something else, respect for the girl they'd once pitied. Tom ripped his own shirt, fashioning a crude bandage. Jesse fumbled for the whiskey, uncorking the bottle and pouring it over the wound, while Will clenched his jaw against the pain. "You'll live," Mara whispered fiercely, refusing to believe anything else. "I won't let you go." Outside, the yard was silent, but thick with tension. The mob had scattered, but Mara knew they weren't safe yet. Will tried to sit up, but Mara gently pushed him down. "Don't be stupid. You saved me, now let me save you." Leah, her cousin, her unlikely ally, appeared in the kitchen doorway, eyes wide with worry. "I'm sorry, Mara," she said quietly. "This never should have happened. Some will never forgive you, but others, they saw what you did. You're not alone anymore." Mara's heart twisted. She'd spent her whole life believing no one would ever stand beside her. Now, battered and bloodied, she realized that courage sometimes makes a family out of strangers. They worked through the night. Tom and Jesse took turns patrolling, watching for movement. Leah brewed a bitter tea of roots and leaves, pressing it to Will's lips, willing him to swallow. Mara sat by his side, wiping sweat from his brow. whispering stories to keep him tethered to the world. Hours crawled by. Will drifted in and out of sleep, sometimes muttering her name, sometimes caught in feverish memories. Mara never left him, holding his hand so tightly her knuckles ached. When the first rays of dawn crept through the battered shutters, Mara finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. She stepped outside, boots crunching on frosty grass, air burning in her lungs. The ranch was battered but standing. Blood marked the porch and the snow, but the place was still hers. She found Tom repairing the broken door, Jessie covering tracks in the snow. Leah stood at the edge of the yard, watching the road for any sign of returning trouble. Mara joined her, silent for a long time. "You should leave, you know," Leah said softly. "It'll never be safe." "Not really." Mara shook her head. "If I leave, they win. I'm tired of running, tired of being the one who goes. I belong here, maybe for the first time in my life." Leah smiled, a sad but genuine curve of her lips. "Then I'll stay too, at least for a while. Someone has to remind you how stubborn you are." Mara let herself smile. The ache in her chest, grief, fear, hope, was sharp but honest. For the first time, she believed she could bear it. Inside, Will stirred. Mara rushed back to him, relief flooding her as his eyes blinked open. He managed a weak smile. "Did we win?" he croaked. "We're still standing, aren't we?" Mara whispered, brushing hair from his face. He squeezed her hand. "You did good, wild girl. Never doubted it." Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them away. "Don't start getting sentimental on me now. You still owe me a lesson on roping cattle and a dance in the barn once you can stand." He laughed, then winced at the pain. "So you got yourself a deal." As the morning brightened, the tiny kitchen filled with the scent of strong coffee and hope. Leah and Tom sat with them, sharing bread and silence. Jessie left at noon, promising to spread the word that the girl they'd all called too wild had stood her ground and saved the man who gave her a chance. But Mara knew the peace was fragile. Rumors would spread, some would twist the truth, and others would come for revenge or for justice. The old wounds, those of tribe, family, and self, would not heal in a single night. Will rested, growing stronger with each hour. Mara took charge of the chores, refusing pity. She fed the horses, mended the chicken wire, swept the floors, her body moving through pain and exhaustion but never slowing. Late that afternoon, as the sun slid low, a rider appeared on the far ridge. Mara tensed, rifle in hand, heart pounding in her ears. Tom squinted. "Looks like trouble," he muttered. Leah joined Mara at the porch. "Whatever happens, we face it together," she said, voice steady. The rider slowed, dismounted, and held up empty hands. He called out, a stranger's voice, but with the accent of Mara's old people. "I come in peace. I have news from your mother." Mara's breath caught. For years, she'd believed herself forgotten, abandoned even by her own kin. Now, with dusk falling and her new life just begun, a messenger had come. What news would this stranger bring? Had her mother finally forgiven her? Or would Mara's fight for belonging open wounds she'd only just begun to heal? Mara stood frozen on the porch, rifle pressed to her shoulder. The stranger waited at the edge of the yard, his breath pluming in the cold air, his stance open and non-threatening. The world narrowed to a single line, her either ranch and the message he carried. Tom and Leah hovered behind her, tense but silent. Will, still weak, pushed himself upright and called through the open window. "Let him speak, Mara. If he meant harm, he wouldn't have ridden in alone." Mara's grip eased, but only slightly. She nodded to the man, who approached slowly, every step deliberate, showing he carried no weapon but a satchel slung over his shoulder. When he stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, he lowered his gaze respectfully. "My name is Caleb," he said. "Your mother sent me. She's alive. She wants you to know that. She regrets what happened. She's sorry." Mara's heart stuttered. The words hit her harder than any fist, the years of silence suddenly heavy as lead. Her mind raced back, the shameful glances, the harsh whispers, the day she was led out of the camp and sold to strangers for a sack of flour and a bolt of cloth. The ache she'd buried deep threatened to break the surface. Leah stepped forward, voice sharp with disbelief. Why now, after everything? Caleb's eyes softened. There's unrest in the tribe. Some regret what was done to Mara. Your mother fought for you, but she was outnumbered. Now with the old chief gone, the new council wishes to make amends. Mara's breath caught. So they send you. Now that I've survived out here, built a life, proved I'm not worthless, they want to ease their conscience. Is that it? No. Caleb's tone was gentle but firm. Your mother wants you home. She says she still sets a place for you at every meal. She still waits for the girl who danced too wildly around the fire. She wanted you to have this. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a beaded necklace, one Mara hadn't seen since she was a child. She never let anyone else touch it. Mara stared at the beads, colors dulled by time, but still bright with memory. Tears threatened, but she held them back, jaw clenched. And if I don't come, will they forget me again? Caleb shook his head. She'll never forget, but she understands if you stay. She said to tell you that being fat never made you unworthy. That was their blindness, not yours. Silence fell, broken only by the wind rattling the bare trees. Will reached for Mara's hand, grounding her, steady. Tom and Leah exchanged uneasy glances, but said nothing. Finally, Mara took the necklace, holding it as if it might burn her. Thank you, Caleb. You've done what you came for. He nodded, a hint of relief in his eyes. I'll leave in the morning. If you want to send a message, I'll carry it. That night, Mara sat by the fire, the necklace in her lap. Will slept fitfully in the next room, Tom and Leah keeping watch. She turned the beads over in her fingers, memories flooding back, her mother's laugh, the songs at dusk, the sting of rejection. She slipped outside, needing air. The ranch was quiet under the starlight, a hush broken only by the occasional snort of a horse. Leah followed, sitting beside her on the steps. For a while, neither spoke. You always said you didn't care what they thought, Leah murmured. Mara managed a crooked smile. I wanted to believe it, but part of me always hoped they'd see me, really see me one day. You don't have to choose, you know, Leah said quietly. You built something here, but it's your right to want both roots and wings. Mara looked at the horizon, mind churning. If she returned, could she ever forgive the tribe or herself? If she stayed, would she forever feel the ache of an empty place at someone else's table? Before dawn, Mara penned a short note for Caleb. Tell my mother I remember. Tell her I am alive, that I have found family in unexpected places, and that I carry her love, even when it hurt. She pressed the necklace to her heart, then tucked it into her shirt. When Caleb left, she stood on the porch watching him ride off. The choice was still hers, maybe for the first time. As days passed, news of the failed mob faded, replaced by rumors of the wild girl who had faced them down. Some neighbors brought food and supplies in secret, others watched from afar, unsure whether to fear or respect her. Mara worked harder than ever, tending Will, repairing fences, caring for every animal on the land. Will healed, slower than he'd like, but with a new gentleness in his eyes. You ever think about going back? He asked one night as they watched the fire die down. Sometimes, Mara admitted, but I think my place is here now. Not because they sent me away, but because I chose to stay. He nodded. That's all anyone can ask for. But as spring crept over the hills, bringing green shoots and birdsong, a new challenge loomed on the horizon. Rumors of a land grab reached their ears, outsiders planning to claim the valley, to force out those who didn't belong. For Mara, it meant another battle, not just for a home, but for the right to exist as she was. As riders appeared on the distant ridge, strangers with cold eyes and official papers, Mara squared her shoulders, ready to defend her chosen family and the land that had become her salvation. Would her courage hold, or would the past finally catch up to her? The first warning came not from a letter, but from the sound of hooves. Too many, too early in the season to be a passing herd. Mara was fixing the broken gate near the west pasture when she saw them, 5 men on horseback, dressed in stiff coats, their hats too clean, eyes sharp and appraising. One carried a rolled map, another wore the badge of a county official. Leah appeared at Mara's side, eyes narrowed, a shovel clutched in her hands. The men rode up, stopping at the edge of the yard. Their leader, a tall man with graying hair and a cold set to his jaw, nodded without a smile. "Morning. Name's Kavanaugh. County surveyor. We're here on official business." Will, still moving stiffly, stepped out onto the porch, one hand resting on the doorframe for support. "This is private land. What do you want?" Kavanaugh ignored him, focusing on Mara. "We have new claims being processed in this valley. States decided to re-examine some old deeds. Boundaries are being redrawn. If you don't have proper papers, you could be evicted." A cold chill shot through Mara. She knew the ranch's deed was old, a battered page in Will's family Bible, passed down through generations but never properly registered. For years, no one had cared enough to challenge it, until now. Leah bristled. "This is our home. You can't just take it because someone in the city wants more land." Kavanaugh's mouth twitched. "We're just following the law, ma'am. If you can prove ownership, you'll have nothing to worry about. If not, well, we'll be back in a week. Have your documents ready or be ready to leave." The men turned their horses, kicking up dust as they rode away. Mara watched them go, heart pounding. She felt the old familiar ache, the world's judgment on bodies and lives that didn't fit its rules. Only now, it wasn't just her place in the tribe at stake, but the survival of everything she'd built. That night, the house was quiet. Will and Leah searched the attic for papers, digging through old trunks and boxes. Mara sat by the fire, necklace heavy on her chest, mind spinning. Tom brought her tea, his hands shaking. "My family lost their land once," he whispered. "They said it would be temporary. We never got it back." "We're not giving up," Mara said, fiercer than she felt. "We'll find the deed. We'll fight this, however we have to." As the days slipped by, the tension mounted. Neighbors whispered of other families already forced off their land, some moving into tents, others gone east for good. Leah rode to town to check records, but returned grim-faced. "The clerk wouldn't even let me in the back room. Said outsiders don't get special treatment." Will, too weak for anger, looked broken. "If they take the ranch, I don't know where we'll go." But Mara would not let defeat take root. She spent every daylight hour searching, poring over faded letters and old maps, cross-referencing landmarks with her own memory of every fence post and tree. Sometimes she paused, hands trembling, imagining her tribe's judgment if she failed again. Other times, rage burned so hot she could barely breathe. On the third day, as she knelt to check the base of the hearthstone where Will's father used to hide valuables, her fingers struck something solid. Heart thumping, she pried up the stone, revealing a tin box. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was the original deed, dated, signed, and sealed by a county judge from 30 years back. She ran to Will, tears in her eyes. He examined the paper with shaking hands, a grin splitting his face. "It's real, Mara. This is it." Hope flared, but not for long. That evening, Kavanaugh returned, this time with 2 deputies. "Let's see what you found," he said, holding out a gloved hand. Mara handed him the deed, watching his face for any sign of mercy. He examined it, frowning, then looked up. "Looks authentic, but the county office has final say. If it's not in their registry, it may not count. You'll have to come to town and make your case tomorrow morning. If you're late, the land will be auctioned." That night, sleep was a stranger. Mara sat awake, every muscle tense, staring at the deed on the table. What if the clerk lost their record? What if the officials lied, protecting their own interests? Leah paced the floor. Tom sharpened his knife out of old habit, and Will stared into the flames, silent and haunted. At dawn, Mara washed and dressed, braiding her hair tightly. She put on her mother's necklace, tucked the deed into her pocket, and saddled the mule, refusing to ride in any way that might suggest she was running. Will gripped her shoulder as she prepared to leave. "You stand tall, Mara. You belong here." "I know," she replied. But the fear gnawed at her belly all the same. As she rode toward town, the sky darkened and storm clouds gathered over the ridge. The courthouse loomed ahead, cold and forbidding. A crowd had gathered on the steps, strangers, neighbors, and those eager to see the fat girl put in her place. Mara stepped into the courthouse, deed in hand, as the judge banged his gavel and silence fell. Would justice be on her side? Or would the world once again decide she was unworthy, no matter how hard she fought? The courthouse air was thick with dust and suspicion as Mara entered, flanked by Will and Leah on either side. The old wooden pews creaked beneath the weight of neighbors, some curious, some scornful, a few silent with worry. At the front, Kavanaugh stood near the judge's bench, arms crossed, face pinched with confidence. The clerk, a lean woman with wire spectacles, whispered to the judge as Mara approached. She felt every eye on her, some measuring, some mocking. The words of her tribe's elders echoed in her mind. Too wild, too much, too soft for a world that carves the strong from stone. But Mara held her ground, shoulders squared, refusing to shrink for anyone. Judge Reynolds, a man whose grey beard and tired eyes spoke of too many years balancing law and loyalty, cleared his throat. "Let's get to it. Miss Mara, you have a deed you wish to submit." "Yes, sir." Her voice didn't tremble. She handed the parchment over, heart hammering as the judge unrolled it with deliberate care. Kavanaugh leaned in, his voice oiled with false concern. "Old papers can be forged. I've seen it before." Will stiffened, but Leah squeezed Mara's hand under the table. "We found it hidden in the hearthstone," Mara explained. "Will's father put it there when the trouble started years ago. It matches the survey records, down to every boundary marker." The judge compared the deed to an ancient ledger, fingers tracing lines inked before Mara was born. The clerk muttered something too soft for the room to catch, but the judge nodded, his brow furrowing. Kavanaugh pressed on, waving at the crowd. "Ask anyone, these folks never registered this land. They came late, squatted, changed fences. You can't let one mistake become precedent for every outsider." A murmur rippled through the benches. Some nodded, others looked away, ashamed. Mara felt the shame rising in her, hot and familiar, but she wouldn't let it drown her. She raised her chin, staring directly at the judge. "I've worked this land, I've cared for the sick. I've buried livestock through winter storms, hauled water through droughts, and rebuilt what fire destroyed. I may not look like the ranchers you're used to seeing, but I have earned every inch of this place." For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence was so deep, Mara could hear her own pulse in her ears. The judge finally looked up. "And yet the registry says nothing for 10 years, that's a gap," Leah spoke up fierce. "Because people like us aren't welcomed in town offices. My mother was turned away every time she tried to file. Some folks here remember. Tell him." An older woman, Mrs. Carter, stood up in the back, her hands trembling. "It's true. I saw it. They never let the children of outsiders finish their paperwork. They'd lose the forms, tell them to come back later, and then close the door." Judge Reynolds listened, eyes flickering with something close to regret. He looked at Mara, then at the deed, then back at the crowd. "We have a dilemma," he said. "Law says records must be filed, but justice isn't just ink on a page. Sometimes it's written in sweat and in the lives built when no one else would stay." Kavanaugh started to object, but the judge raised a hand. "Enough. You brought this challenge, Mr. Kavanaugh. You want the law, so let's be clear. The land is marked in your own survey, and the deed predates any claims you've brought forward. It's not perfect, but it's enough." A wave of relief crashed through Mara's chest, but it broke when Kavanaugh sneered. "So you'll let a fat squatter and her wild family take what others could make profitable?" Gasps echoed. The judge's gavel slammed down. "One more word like that and you'll spend the night in jail for contempt. I see a family. I see hard work. I see a deed. Unless someone can prove fraud, this land stays in their hands." Tears pricked Mara's eyes, but she blinked them away. Will squeezed her hand. Leah beamed, and Tom, watching from the doorway, pumped his fist quietly. But as they turned to leave, the clerk stopped them. "Wait," she said, holding a thin envelope. "This arrived for you, Mara, delivered by a young rider this morning, from your old tribe." The world shrank for a moment. Mara took the letter, fingers shaking. She unfolded it slowly, seeing her mother's handwriting, wavering but unmistakable. "My daughter," it read. Word has reached us that you survived, that you built a home, that strangers call you wild but not weak. Your father is gone. The old rules died with him. If you wish, you may return, not as a burden, but as one who chose her own life." A hush fell as Mara read aloud. Will and Leah stood beside her, silent. The weight of old wounds and new hope mingled in her chest. She looked out at the courthouse, at the neighbors, at the sun breaking through the storm clouds outside. For the first time, the world seemed wide open. Would Mara return to the tribe that sold her, or remain with the family she had built from scratch? The door was open, but only she could decide which path to walk. The wind was sharp and restless as Mara stood on the ridge overlooking the valley. Below, the ranch stretched out, frost on the fences, smoke curling from the rebuilt chimney, and Will working with Leah to mend a broken gate. The courthouse victory had changed everything and nothing at once. The land was hers, legally, publicly, finally. But now, for the first time, she was truly faced with a choice. In her hand, she clutched her mother's letter. The words replayed in her mind with every step she took. "If you wish, you may return." Not as a burden, but as one who chose her own life. It was what she'd wanted for so long, an invitation, a hand reaching back after years of silence. Yet as she walked the perimeter of the ranch, boots crunching over hard earth, Mara's heart wrestled with memories and hope. That afternoon, she told Will and Leah the truth. They sat in the kitchen, the table between them worn smooth by years of hands, laughter and sorrow. "They want me back," she whispered, showing them the letter. "For the first time since I was a child, I'm not unwanted." Will's face tensed, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "You're wanted here too," he said, voice gruff. "You've built this place. You saved it, when I couldn't." Leah reached across the table, taking Mara's hand in hers. "So you belong where you choose, Mara. Don't let old wounds call you home if your heart's already found it." The sun dropped lower, painting the hills gold. That evening, as supper cooked over the fire, Mara wandered outside, eyes tracking the sky. The fear of being alone had always driven her, first away from the tribe that shamed her, then into the arms of a stranger, then into the fight for this very patch of land. But now she saw clearly. The only person left to forgive was herself. A horse's hoofbeats echoed up the road. Tom appeared at the gate, a sack slung over his shoulder and a wary smile on his lips. "Heard there was a celebration," he called, but his eyes searched Mara's face for something more. She laughed, breathless. "If you're here for the food, you'll have to help wash dishes." He swung down, boots hitting the frozen dirt. "Wouldn't miss it. Not for the world." His gaze lingered, gentle, steady, offering comfort without demand. As dusk fell, neighbors gathered at the edge of the yard, awkward at first, bringing pies, warm bread, and nervous apologies. Even those who had shouted insults and thrown stones days before came with lowered eyes and small gifts. The sheriff tipped his hat to Mara. "You kept your head when the rest of us lost ours. Sorry it took trouble for us to see who you are." Music started up, a fiddle, clumsy but sincere. Laughter broke out, cautious, testing the air. Someone tugged Mara onto the makeshift dance floor. She hesitated, then let herself be pulled into the circle, clapping along as Leah spun, skirts flaring, joy bursting free. It was almost midnight when the party quieted. Will found Mara alone by the corral, moonlight on her cheeks. "What will you do?" he asked. She didn't answer at first, just watched the horses in the paddock, their breath misting silver in the cold. "I thought I wanted to go back, prove I could be what they wanted. But I don't have to prove anything anymore, Will. Not to them, not to anyone." He nodded, a slow smile breaking across his tired face. "Then stay or go. Whatever you choose, do it for yourself this time." A warm hand slipped into hers. Tom stood beside her, silent. His presence alone gave her strength. The next morning, Mara rose before dawn. She saddled her horse and rode out, letter tucked safe in her pocket. The trail split at the old cottonwood tree, one path toward her childhood home, the other back to the ranch, the life she had fought for. At the fork, Mara stopped. She looked east, toward the rising sun and the land that had cast her out. She looked west, to the home she'd claimed with sweat and scars, friends and found family. She sat there for a long while, memories and possibilities rising like the mist. At last, she drew a slow breath and spoke to the quiet dawn. I am not a burden. I am not what they said. I am not too wild, too fat, too much. I am enough. She turned her horse. With calm certainty, she headed home. Not back to the past, but forward to the life she had made, surrounded by those who had chosen her, just as she finally chose herself. As the ranch came into view, Mara saw Will, Leah, Tom, and the others waving from the yard. She lifted her hand in return, heart swelling with a hope deeper than any wound. This was her place, her fight, her family, her life. Spring arrived in the high country with a quiet stubbornness, melting the last crusts of ice from the creek and coaxing new green from the winter-tough grass. For the first time in years, Mara felt the shift not as a threat, but as a promise of things growing where once there was only endurance. Days began early and ended late. She rose before sunrise, lighting the kitchen stove, gathering eggs, and feeding the animals while Will and Leah handled repairs and planting. The air was crisp, laced with birdsong and the sweet scent of earth. Even the horses seemed changed, stepping light, coats shining in the morning light. Mara was different too. She moved through each task with an ease she'd never known, her body strong and sure, her laughter carrying across the yard without apology. No one called her a burden. No one flinched when she took charge. If her tribe's words echoed sometimes in her mind, she answered them with the quiet certainty of every chore done, every plan made, every hand reached out in friendship. One afternoon, as she patched a section of fence with Tom, he paused, leaning on the rail. "You ever think about going back?" he asked gently, a hint of concern in his eyes. Mara shook her head. "Not the way they'd want. I'll write my mother again, maybe visit one day. But I've built something here, Tom. Something no one can take from me." He smiled, the lines at his eyes softening. "Good, because I'd miss you if you left." He squeezed her hand briefly. No claim, just understanding, and then got back to work. As the weeks passed, the ranch became more than a shelter. It became a gathering place. Neighbors who once eyed Mara with suspicion now sought her advice on livestock and crops. Children played beneath the trees she'd planted, their laughter mingling with the clatter of tools and the lowing of cattle. Leah, her belly round with the promise of new life, confided in Mara during quiet evenings by the fire. "You saved us, you know. Not just the ranch, but all of us. Will needed someone who wouldn't give up. I needed a sister. I hope you see that now." Mara smiled, the words settling deep in her heart. "I do," she said. "I really do." And Will, stubborn as ever, took to consulting Mara on every big decision. "Couldn't run this place without you," he'd say. And for once she believed it wasn't just politeness. Letters arrived from her mother every so often, short, careful, but warmer each time. Mara wrote back, sharing news of the ranch, the people, and the peace she'd found. The past still ached, but it no longer controlled her. She had learned, through sweat and hardship, that forgiveness was not about forgetting but about freeing herself to live. The memory of her tribe's rejection never vanished entirely. But with every day she chose her own path, every time she faced down doubt or helped someone in need, that wound grew smaller, the scar less tender. She could remember it now without shame, without rage, just as a story from another lifetime. Late one night, after a long day of branding calves and fixing a broken axle, Mara sat outside beneath the wide, star-scattered sky. Tom joined her in the quiet, settling beside her on the porch steps. "Funny thing about life out here," he mused, "is you end up exactly where you're needed, even if you never saw it coming." She laughed, soft and real. "Never thought I'd be a rancher. Never thought I'd have a family again." He nudged her shoulder. "Sometimes family finds you, Mara. Sometimes you have to build it from the ground up." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes when there's nothing left to prove. The seasons turned. Mara thrived. When Leah's baby was born, a loud, healthy boy with a wild shock of hair, Mara was there, holding Leah's hand, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. The ranch erupted in celebration. Every neighbor, every friend gathered close to welcome the new life. And in the golden light of dusk, as music and laughter filled the air, Mara felt a peace so deep it seemed to echo from the land itself. She was not what others had tried to label her. She was not too wild, too much, or not enough. She was exactly who she was meant to be, a woman shaped by hardship, softened by kindness, and finally, unafraid to claim her place in the world. Years would pass. The ranch would grow, the valley would change, and Mara's legend of the girl once sold for being too fat would become a story mothers told their daughters on long winter nights. A story not of shame, but of strength. And whenever doubt whispered, Mara would ride out at dawn, the cool wind on her face, the promise of another day ahead. She'd remember how far she'd come, and she'd whisper to the morning, "This is my life, and I choose it." If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true-hearted tales of resilience and hope. What would you have done in Mara's place? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you're ready for another story of courage, check out our next video right here.